Good morning, good evening, and good afternoon, lovely people, depending on where you are watching us from in this beautiful world of ours. We've got amazing, incredible weather in Sydney. How is the weather in Tasmania?
Oh, it's actually a really overcast, rainy,
Oh,
just sprinkly kind of rain kind of day. It's very like tuck up next to the fire kind of day here.
oh, complete polar opposite.
Yes.
Well, beautiful people, I am so excited to have this lovely woman next to me today because there is a bit of a pre-story to how Julia and I met. I had the pleasure of interviewing Daniel Sih over 2 years ago in August 2022. And in our little pre chat, I said I'm more than happy to share the link to that in a show note. But for now, I really want to offer this stage to Julia Verdouw. And Julia is here to tell a really, really heartwarming, beautiful story. Without further ado, Julia, would you do us the honor to introduce yourself to the audience, please?
Thank you, Marie. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me on your show. Yes, my name's Julia. I live in Hobart, in Tasmania, so Literewita, Nipaluna, and it's an overcast day. It's a beautiful place to live here in Tasmania. I have lived here for most of my life. I was brought up in Launceston, up north of the state, and have lived down here in Hobart for the last 25 years plus or so. I have also spent a bit of time in other places in the world, but really Tasmania has been my home. So
And
I
it's such an incredible place. I've only had the pleasure of
yeah,
being there once when I was heavily pregnant with my first son. My husband had a business trip there and I went with him. So I still
yeah,
remember that.
must come again. It's a great
I'd love
place to
to.
call home.
Yeah.
Um, Yeah, so I have three daughters. My husband Michael was part of my life for a long time, and we'll talk about
Mm.
that a little bit more. I guess
Yeah.
we would have been married for 30 years this year,
Wow.
and he passed away about 3 years ago now.
Mm.
Uh, and I'm an academic. I work for the National Institute of Christian Education, and before that, I worked for many, many years at the University of Tasmania. My background is sociology,
Mm.
and research. Really, I've done a lot of work in policy development in housing affordability and homelessness, and more recently, I've moved into the field of education. So, uh, really doing a lot of work with students in particular and staff around developing research projects and
Mm.
writing theses and doing research projects as staff as well. So,
Yeah.
um, so yeah, that's just a
That's
little bit about
beautiful.
me. I live,
Beautiful.
yeah. I mean, the backstory, if you've listened to that before, is that I kind of live on a little bit
I
of a shared.
Yeah, we do have the backstory. For those who haven't listened to it, though, I would like to take them back to the beginning because obviously your story started with a really beautiful love story and a really beautiful story around community. Where would you like to start on that
Yeah.
journey?
Well, perhaps
How
going.
did you meet Mike? I would love to
Oh,
hear that. I don't know
yeah,
that part yet.
absolutely, absolutely. So, this was way back in 1992, I reckon. Michael was actually from Hobart, and I lived in Launceston. And Michael had to come to Launceston to study. That he had done a bachelor of environmental design in Hobart, but he had to come and finish his architecture degree with 2 years of study up at the University of Tasmania in Launceston, where they study
Mm.
architecture. So he had come up to live in Launceston and was boarding, just share housing with some friends of mine. So I got to know him through a family that I'd sort of grown up around, and
Mm.
met him that way. And we both loved music. We had a group of friends actually who we really connected over music. So we just would hang out together a lot and
Hmm.
play music and just hang out on the weekends and
Sounds
enjoy each
so
other's
lovely.
company. Yeah, so
Yeah.
that's how we got to know each other. I married. We went out with each other for maybe 18 months and then married really really quickly. I was 19 at the time, so I was just a
Oh,
baby
that's
really.
beautiful. That's
I've got a
adorable.
I've got a daughter who's 19, and I just think I was young.
Don't you dare. No.
I know. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, so got married in 1994
Mm,
and moved to
wow.
Melbourne. Actually, Michael had won a student prize and was able to go and work with an architecture firm in Melbourne and ended up working for them for a number of years.
Mm,
So we lived in Melbourne for a time and then travelled around the world for a year. We lived in St. Petersburg in
wow.
Russia for 6 months, again
Incredible.
working. which was an amazing experience. And then came back and settled in Hobart.
Was it Russian winter or summer when you lived
We
there?
were just moving out of the Russian winter, so it was minus 15 when we got
Oh my
there. It
God.
was so
Yeah.
I've never
And
experienced
that's
cold
still
like that.
mild for Russia when you think of it.
Exactly,
Oh my
exactly.
God. Yeah.
So yeah, so we got back to Australia and moved to Hobart again, and we've settled there. And Michael started his own architecture practice with a couple of colleagues, and I then started my university life in earnest then, and started from scratch. I studied an undergrad degree, and then my honours and a PhD, and then continued into working at the University of Tasmania. So Michael was just a beautiful human being who gave me so much space, in that time in our marriage, just to sort of figure out who I wanted to be and where I wanted to head with my own career. And we just held that in a nice tension with each other as we both sort of worked out, what we wanted to do in life. So, but at the same time, we also we're both people of faith, and that was something that's been really shared in our life. And one of the things that we really we felt a calling to, I guess, together was to really embed in community. And when we got back to Hobart, we, with a number of friends, we started a small faith community that was not so much about going along to an institutional church, but something a little bit more organic and a little bit more suburban.
I love that.
It took a lot of different forms over time, but it kind of ended up being that Michael and I joined, and we did this with a few different couples over time. We did some shared living, experimenting with shared living. We lived together with there were 5 of us and a couple of kids in a big house down here in Denern near Sandy Bay. And then after a while, we started having a few more children. We ended up buying some land and building 2 houses on a piece of land, and that was with Daniel and Kylie. And together, we had 6 children come along the way. We had 3 children, 3 girls. They had 2 boys and a girl. A girl and 2 boys.
I love that you both say that. Like even Daniel said, we had 6 children between the 2 of us. It's like your families really blended, didn't they? Yes. There was really that communal living, and neither of you said we had 3 children, and both of you said, we had 6 children between the 2 families. I found that beautiful how blended you were, and how much community, deep seated, beautiful community you really lived. That's incredible.
Yeah, and there was a real intention behind that. And we were intentional from the beginning about sharing our lives, sharing some of the things that we own, sharing some land, sharing the way that we, we talked a lot about how to bring up children and how to do that in a whole flourishing kind of way. And, our kids shared a trampoline and shared the sort of garden space and shared chickens. And
the chickens, what is the story with the chickens? Whose idea was it?
Takes up a lot of our story, in funny ways. Like we always just wanted chickens because we've got a bit of land here. So we built a little hutch and had a few chickens, had a few chickens. We bought a few chickens. But then we just had disaster after disaster with the chickens. We had, first of all, I can't remember what happened first. Anyway, a chicken coop, the chickens died. Like, I don't know whether it was a storm or I don't know. We lost one lot of chickens. We then built a slightly bigger coop and then bought some more chickens. And then we decided we wanted to get really nice chickens. So we got Barnevelders, which are just beautiful kind of Dutch bred, beautiful chickens who not the best layers, but they're just great chickens. Anyway, we then lost the complete hutch again to a landslide at the back of our property. No. So we rebuilt this. It's actually called the Taj Mahal. Michael designed it. It's this beautiful chicken coop that's got 2 parts and 2 runs, and our chickens have lived like kings and queens mostly in that run for many, many years now. And Daniel and Michael between them would take month on, month off and do the cleaning and feed them. And since Michael has gone, Daniel's been doing that, and his boys too, actually. Hats off to them. They do a lot of that. But we get lots of eggs, which is really lovely.
Yeah,
But
I
yeah,
can imagine.
the chickens are part of our family.
Yeah, I can tell. It was so funny when Daniel started talking about the chickens as well. So you really did live community, as you said, very intentionally, very actively. You had dinner together at least once or twice a week, and also had like a connecting door between your two houses. Is that correct?
No, so our houses are quite separate and actually probably
Oh,
even further away from each other than
then I misunderstood.
in a normal
Yeah,
suburb, but because we've got a little bit of land, so there's probably
yeah.
around 20, 30 metres between our
Oh,
houses.
okay.
But we did share, like yeah, I mean, our kids have grown up kind of almost like siblings. They're always at each
Mm,
other's places, and
mm,
we do a lot of, we eat together every week at least, and we still pray together. We've always had a rhythm
mm,
of praying together once a week, and just some really lovely shared rhythms that have continued, even though Michael's not here, and it's been actually such a gift to me to be in this situation already when Michael
yeah.
passed away, because it created a lot of a sense of safety and security
Mm,
for me in a way that I probably wouldn't have experienced or felt if
yeah.
I hadn't been living in this arrangement. So yeah, it's been a
There's such an important topic, I believe, for a lot of people who have lost a loved one, in particular a husband, I believe, because
mm,
I believe that the traditional roles are still, the husband is the one keeping you safe, the provider, the protector. I remember quite distinctly when Rob passed away that the feeling safe was a high priority for me because that really came with Rob. Rob was really good at providing that for me. With him, I always felt safe. He was my knight in shining armor. There was no fear when I was with him. And that to me became really, really important. Can you share a little bit about that? Because you share about the community, how that was already a part for you that obviously contributed quite significantly to the feeling of being protected and provided in terms of emotional support and the prayers and the eating together. I have something similar, but way not at that caliber with my, I almost wanted to say family. Wow. With my neighborhood because I've got 6 houses around me where I live.
yeah,
So
yeah.
I always felt that there was always somebody there to keep an eye on us to, like I felt cradled in. How was that for you in terms of feeling safe after Michael passed away?
Yeah, yeah. It is a really important thing, I think.
Mm.
And part of our community
Especially when you have young kids.
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Part of the intentionality of our community was that it wasn't just about Daniel and Kylie and our family. It was about
Mm.
embedding ourselves in a local place where we could be part of a wider community. And so
Yeah.
we had dinners that were always, we'd have 20, 25 people for dinner every week. And that included people from our suburb around us and people in our
Mm.
street. And
Mm.
when Mick died, I remember feeling that palpable sense of real, it's one of the dimensions of loss in that your person is no longer there, and you realize all of a sudden, actually, that person had so much to do with how safe I feel and how and losing Michael, I felt quite vulnerable for a time. I mean, it meant that we had 4 women in the house, or 3 teenage girls, and myself,
Mm.
um, and yeah, it's not always particularly safe around here. There are some, there has been definitely a lot of police presence around here, and I was
Mm.
really aware of that. But I was also, what was so beautiful is that we also had this really strong community in this local area that I knew would be watching out, and I knew
Yeah.
that Danielle and Kylie were around, and I could call on them when I needed anything.
Mm.
And there have been times where it's been really tricky, even with my own girls, and we've been,
Mm.
that each child deals with grief in such a different way, and
Oh, yes.
we've had moments where I have just actually felt really incapable of dealing with what's going on with my girls, and so
Mm.
I've been able to just kind of say, Dan or Kai, would you just come and help? And so I've just had
Yeah.
people here on my property where I can just have an extra pair of adult
Yeah.
someone to mediate, someone to help, someone to
Yeah.
bring a different perspective in and just to
Yeah,
help.
that's so important, a different perspective, like just
Yeah,
bouncing off ideas, that's, yeah,
absolutely.
so
Yeah.
underrated when you have it all the time, but then when you're
Oh,
on your own, all of a sudden it
that's right.
really
Yeah,
becomes a different dimension, the
absolutely.
parenting. Do
Yeah.
you mind, because I'm quite aware of that, our audience is not really familiar with the story. Do you mind taking us through the part where Michael actually died before we go any further with that?
Yep, absolutely.
Can you
So,
share that from your perspective, obviously?
yes. So it was about 3 years ago. It was August in 2021.
Mm,
Um, Michael was otherwise a fit and healthy 52-year-old.
mm,
Michael did have he had some heart issues that he's had all his life that he's just hadn't monitored. And there were, I think that probably was a contributing factor in the end. But he'd been to the
mm,
specialist a few months before that and been given the all clear, and there was no reason to
mm,
worry about that. But it was a Tuesday evening, just a very normal Tuesday evening. He would cook on Tuesdays, so he had come
mm,
home and was making butter chicken for dinner. And I got home a little bit later, about 6:30 or so, and I always remember walking through the door that night and putting my bag down and walking into the kitchen and walking around to him. And he stopped what he was doing and turned to me. And usually we would just kind of give each other a peck on the cheek and say, "Hey, how's your day going?"
mm.
But this night he turned to me and we just had this really lovely long hug. And then we just had this really lovely long kiss. And I remember in my head thinking at the time, like, oh, this is really nice. Like,
Mm.
I just something in both of us stopped and gave some space to that. And it was,
Wow,
I'm just so thankful. I'm so thankful for that. That's just such
that's
a
so
little thing, but I'm
special.
so thankful for that.
That's so
And
not little. It's amazing.
yeah,
I
no,
love
it's
it.
not actually. You're
Mm,
right. Yeah. So, and then we had dinner together. Only two of the girls were there that night because my other daughter was away at a friend's place for dinner. And
mm,
it was just a really normal dinner. Mick showed us some video of our new puppy that he'd taken in the morning. And just,
mm,
it was just a really lovely, normal dinner. And then he drove up the road to pick up our elder daughter and got back. And he put the kettle on and put two tea bags in the tea cup. And then he said, "I'm just going to go and hang the wash and do some work downstairs. I'll come back for the tea." Anyway, half an hour later, and that night I just didn't have to do anything urgently, and I was just sitting around the dinner table actually with the girls that were there, just chatting, playing games with our puppy and just
mm,
doing evening nice catch up stuff, which was lovely. But I realised after about half an hour, 20 minutes, half an hour, that he hadn't come back for the tea. So I finished
mm,
making the teas and I went downstairs and I put them in my office, and I thought, oh, because the office light was, I can't remember what on or off. Anyway, came into the office and realised that Mick wasn't here. I was like, oh, where's Mick? So I went around, poked my head around the corner, and we've got a rumpus room there, and it was dark, and I could see that the outside light was on, and I thought, oh, he's hanging the wash. So that's what he said he was going to do. So I went back in and started working. Anyway, in the meantime, one of my girls was looking for Dad, and I said, "Oh, he's out hanging the wash." And so she went out to look for Mick, and she tripped over him on the way in the rumpus
oh,
room. So he had gone out to hang the wash. He'd come back in. He had fallen over in the rumpus room, and it was dark. And because we were all upstairs, we hadn't heard him. So I had no idea how long that period of time had been. It had been within that kind of half an hour period of time. But then, of course, she, raised the alarm and called the ambulance, and Daniel and Kylie came over and they helped with CPR, and it took the ambulance about 9 minutes to come, and then they worked on him for about 30 minutes. But there was no response at all through that time, and they called it after 30 minutes. So yeah,
mm.
it was traumatic for the girls to sort of
I can
see
only imagine.
it sort of happened at home, and yeah, it
Mm,
was a really hard evening. The girls actually went straight up to the Dan and Kyes and sat with their family while
yeah.
we were down, and the paramedic were doing their thing, and then after it was all over, the paramedic said, "Why don't you just let us just tidy up a bit because, it was like a bomb had gone off. And so I went up with Daniel and Kylie, and we told the girls, which was the most difficult thing
Yeah, of course.
that I had to do. And I just remember one of the things I remember about that moment was walking in and seeing all the girls were in different spots in the lounge room. And I remember saying, "I'm so sorry, girls, that your dad hasn't made it." And all of them responded in completely different ways, and I didn't know where to go. So my daughter was sitting in the corner, right in the corner behind a couch. She screamed and just started screaming. My other daughter was lying on the couch, and she just put her head underneath a doona that she had on her. And then my other daughter was sitting and just started crying. And I was like, I don't know where to go.
Yeah.
But thankfully there were a few adults around, so we all just picked one and went there. So that's a little bit of the story about what happened. And of course, life has looked very different, as you know, since then. And
I can so feel the emotion, because, as you know, I've gone through having to tell the boys in my case, and it just really tugs on my heartstrings, because I can only imagine what that would feel like, having to go into 3 different directions. And I was sitting in the middle. I had both my boys to my left and my right, so it was different for me. But I, once more see the importance of community, the blessing that you had 2 other adults there to hold space for you, for your girls, and to have community around you to hold you in that, most difficult hour. Daniel also mentioned something in the interview where I took note of that, about the prayer. He said that they were praying during that whole time, and that it was a very special prayer, that that you guys had prayed together before. Can you share a little bit about that and the significance of that particular prayer?
Yeah, absolutely. So after we were called back after the paramedics had finished, and they actually, and they were just so good. They created a bunch of space down in the rumpus room, and Michael, they redressed Michael, and they just put him in a way that wasn't so horrific for the girls to see, and of course it was still horrific for them to see him having passed away. But we were able to, and my mum and my sister had joined by that stage, and Michael's sister had come as well. So there were a few of us, and we went back down and just sat in a circle around him. And there was a prayer that Michael and I had sung to our girls, that I had grown up with, that my parents had sung to me every night as growing up. And we had sung that every night to our daughters as they went to bed, and in that time before going to sleep. And as a family, we sung that together, as a family and community. We sung that together over him and to him, and it was just so beautiful. We did the same. My sister lost a baby at birth, and as a family we did the same. We sang the same song to her, and so this song just had this really beautiful significance. It was a blessing song, and just a blessing over the person we love, and just. It's a really childlike song, a really childlike prayer too. So there's just something beautiful and simple about it.
I love that
we all knew, and it was dear to all of us, and it was just a really beautiful moment. Yeah,
that is absolutely incredible. It really touches me deeply hearing that. There's something so special to have these moments after somebody passed, because so often we are robbed of that. The body is taken away, and then there's this emptiness afterwards. And I think it's just incredibly spiritual and beautiful to have that moment of being with the body in that transitional period, to be there, to hold that soul in prayer, in the transitioning moment. It's just really, really incredible. I wanted to ask you about that as well, because we did talk about that a little bit in our pre-chat before we went live. You mentioned about the blessings that you find in grief. I often refer to them as hidden gifts in adversity. I strongly believe that there are gifts in every adversity, but it does take time and a particular openness, and maybe also a certain level of healing to actually be aware of them, or to be able to see
Yeah,
them and to allow them in. Can you
yeah,
share a little bit about that from your perspective? Because I know that you have a very
yeah,
similar perspective, which I love. So I'd love to
yeah,
hear from you.
yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, of
I've,
course.
yeah, I've been thinking about a lot about this, and there's lots of things I can say here, I think, but I think our culture really wants to try and tell us or teach us that grief and loss are things that we need to sort of push aside and try and do our very best to not encounter in our life. And what I have learned, and of course, I never wanted this to happen. It was, we're thrust into this sometimes without,
Yeah.
it's unbidden. It's something that we don't want. But having had this circumstance in my life, I think what I've learned is a couple of things. And I really don't like saying this in a way, but I feel for me that suffering has helped me understand and know myself and God, and that'll be different for different people, but it's helped me understand, know myself and about life so much more deeply. And I
Mm.
think there are gifts in loss and grief that
Mm.
if we can see that, or allow ourselves to be open to that, we are given gifts in that, and there are lots of different ways. I've just been reading a book by Nicholas Walterstorff. It's called Living in Grief, and it comes after many,
Mm.
many years after he lost his own son, and he wrote a book called Lament for a Son. But this one's a little bit more of just a thoughtful reflection on grief and the time that's passed for him. And he talks about living with grief and loss redemptively, and I really love that idea, and I can just see how some of the gifts that I've been given too over time. And he talks about things like, reordering a way to live redemptively with grief is to reorder your love. And when I think about my
Mm.
last 3 years, I have felt so completely stripped bare in so many ways. The
Oh,
loss
yeah.
is just layer after layer after layer,
Mm.
and I have just felt so weak and broken and humbled in so many ways by the experience that I've been through. And but I think we can just look at that as a minus sign so easily, rather than looking at, what can that teach me about who I am and what I value, and how does that help me reorder what I love in life and what I value in life? Because
Yeah.
I can see in a new way what what really matters, and what doesn't matter. And it's been a beautiful, that's been a beautiful gift. I feel like I gained something in that. I'm given something in that. Even though I didn't want
Yeah.
it, I still am given
Mm.
something in that. I think,
I love I love how you put that, even though I didn't want that, that's what I gained. And that
yeah,
moment, or not even, it's not even a moment, I believe it's a whole process of, as you said that so beautifully, it's that stripping bare, that completely, there is really that deepest core of who you are that really comes through and is, I believe, rediscovered in a completely different light. And
yeah,
that is a very raw, very vulnerable, but I feel at the same time also a very powerful process of
yeah,
coming home to your core. And I love that
yeah,
word. I always love that word core, because it's from core, the heart,
yeah,
they're really coming back to your heart.
yeah,
And that to me is yeah, a real gift in adversity,
yeah.
finding who you truly are and coming back to that. I also know that you have written a book about your experience. Is that correct? Or can you share a little bit what the book is about?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's called The Valley of the Shadow, and that's a reference to Psalm 23, I think. Yes.
Mm-hmm.
And it's this whole last 3 years has felt like walking through the valley of the shadow, and just a really, really difficult time. And I'm an academic. I do lots of writing, but I actually really struggled to journal and write. Um,
Mm.
write for a lot after Michael died. So I wrote poetry, and
Mm.
after about a year and a half, I decided that I wanted to share some of my poetry, and
Mm.
I wrote some prose around it as well. And there are a lot of different ideas in that, but just wanted to share it with some family and friends. So I sort of started on this process of, well, how do I just photocopy it and give it around, and ended up, long story short, my workplace is not a publisher, but they do publish work, and they sort of took up the mantle and published my book for me. So it's
That's
this
lovely.
little
Oh my
blue
God.
volume. It's
That's
really
beautiful.
beautifully
Yeah.
put together, and it's
And
just
what a
got some of
nice
the,
Christmas present that would be. Hint, hint.
yeah, it's writing on a season of loss and grief, and I just write about the experiences that I've had, and I just try, I think, in an attempt to give words to people who might struggle to put words to that kind of thing,
Yeah.
or just to deepen understanding for those who want to know more about what grief is, or how to walk alongside someone else as they grieve. So
Julia,
yeah,
I love what you just said, to give people words to where sometimes people really fail to have words. And obviously, every story of grief is just as unique as the person experiencing it. So, in other words, I can't believe how fast this time always goes. I'm like, we're right in the middle of the story, and I'm like, oh my God, this half an hour always goes so fast. But before we go, is there a way for you that you could maybe wrap up our conversation today? If there's one thing that you would like for people who are listening to this to take away, what would that be?
yeah, thank you. Look, I think probably a little bit of what I've said already, that grief is not something that we need to see as just a minus sign, but it actually helps us understand and deepen who we are, and knowing ourselves, knowing God, knowing others, in a way that gives something to us that's really, really beautiful and very human. I think it
Yeah.
also, one of the things that it also does is it gives us real empathy and compassion for others. So
Mm.
don't be afraid necessarily of grief. There are things that we can embrace in it, as hard and challenging as that is, that give us something, and give us something good, and give us something whole, and make us more whole.
I love this. I love this. Thank you so much for wrapping this up so nicely, but more importantly, thank you so much for being here and sharing your story. I am so deeply touched by your story because a lot of those things obviously really hit home for me. And yeah, it was an absolute honor to have you here today and share your side of the story, Julia. Thank you. And everybody else listening to this, if you got some value out of that, please feel free to subscribe. Click the notification bell so you get alerted for every weekly episode of Unsilence Grief. And of course, feel free to share this episode if you feel that somebody could get value out of that. I'd really love that. So thank you so much for being here today. This is Julia and Marie signing off. Bye for now. Thank you.